to address society's biggest problems, we need the right words to describe them. And it seems like we have ceded the power of words to certain groups that use those words, and all of a sudden that becomes the conditioning of how we think.
Yeah, well, that's happening in the universities.
So walk us through that as you see it, because that's such a subtle, seemingly subtle reality, but incredibly powerful in that it limits what we can think about. Suddenly, you are only allowed to think of problems in a certain context, and you can't say what you see because it violates those.
Yeah, well, the problem with that is that, that means it interferes with the mandates of your conscience. Like you won't be able to satisfy your conscience with an ideological theory about how the world works. That'll never work.
No.
Partly because it's not particularized enough. Like it's not particularized enough to you, and partly because it just isn't sufficient. But Marxism, for example, it's propositionalized. You can really understand it if you accept the first few axioms. It's logical all the way up. Unlike something, say, like Christianity or any other religious system, which is full of weird irrationalities in a sense, and it's not programmatic, at least not in a simple manner, the same way these sorts of theories are. So they're very attractive to the intellect. And then young people are enticed. It's like, well, there's poor people, and look at them suffering. And then there's rich people, and well, maybe they're not suffering the same way. Maybe they are too, but it certainly doesn't appear that way. And maybe it's unfair. It looks unfair. It looks unjust. Well, here's why, and here's the solution. It's like if you're a good person, you'll go along with that. And well, it's very attractive, and it's no wonder, but it doesn't work. And partly it's because it doesn't take the problem seriously enough.
Tribes historically would have certain value systems. They, internally, even without speaking about it, agree, and then they use those values to define their tribe. And other tribes would have different values. Mm-hmm. In the world we live in now, certain values seem to be strongly held by some tribes, not others. It creates opportunity for conflict. Certainly it's true within political parties, definitely true across countries. If we have to address that at the personal level to start with, how do people get clear on their true values? Because you end up with this dead end if you only follow what you're being told is what's important to you, because it doesn't agree with your conscience. It won't always, for nobody will it always agree with their conscience, because we're all different. Pushing back on those ideologies requires a different level of bravery, because you'll get canceled. You'll be taken out very quickly. Yeah. And the smarter your ideas are, I think it's one of the challenges you face. People fear you most because you articulate.
It isn't clear that it isn't going to kill me.
Well, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, we can talk about that.
Problem.
Yeah. Why do you do it?
Because the alternative is worse. So that's why. That's why I do it. So, I took the problems I was studying when I wrote my first book, Maps of Meaning, which is this Auschwitz Guard problem. Not only that, but also the solution to the Auschwitz Guard problem. Because I always thought if you could really specify a problem, the solution would emerge from the specification of the problem. And I think it did emerge for me. What was the solution? Well, don't be evil. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means be careful with what you say. That really means that. And it means pay attention to beauty, pay attention to music, listen to other people, right? Try to love your enemy, because, do you want enemies? Do you really need enemies? Really? Your life's probably hard enough. And so, in relationship to ideology, from whence should we derive our values? That's the question. Well, that's a very, very complicated question. We all need to talk about that. The first thing we have to understand is that we see the world through a hierarchy of values. And, people say, the ideologues, for example, who often follow the Marxist line, say, follow the science. It's like, okay, the science tells us we see the world through a structure of values. So, what do we do now? What does that mean? And from where do we derive our values? And then that brings up the other questions you asked. Is like, well, other people have different values, groups, individuals. What do we do in the face of that diversity of values? Value nothing. No. First of all, that's impossible, because you just can't even see if you do that. Literally, I mean that literally. You cannot perceive the world without a hierarchy of values. Okay, we're stuck with a hierarchy of values. We're stuck with value distinctions. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, that conversation is just beginning to happen explicitly, because the realization that a hierarchy of values is an inescapable precondition for perception and action is something that has just recently been discovered, and maybe, it started to percolate up as a profound problem in the early 60s, partly among AI researchers. And we don't know what to do with that, because it means that we have to take the problem of value unbelievably more seriously than anything else, which is logical if, you need a hierarchy of values, and if that proposition is true. And that begs the question, what's at the highest point? How is that differentiated into a hierarchy, a pyramidal hierarchy? And how does that apply to everyone across cultures and across the diversity of individuals? Very, very complicated problem, but specifying the problem properly is the first step towards solving it.
Parents have a difficult enough time managing their own lives, much less teaching their children. But that's the scaffolding I think we're charged with offering the children, that hierarchy of values. Mm-hmm. But to take the place of the broken family, and it is broken, schools are taking these tasks on. And so now we have schools teaching values that they believe are best for the kids, mm-hmm. which may not be the values the parents want for those kids.
Mm-hmm. In some instances, they also, the educators presume that values can be taught explicitly in that fashion, in a sort of ideological manner. Values actually can't be, I don't think. Memorizing the structure of the ideology can be, but I presume that partly what it'll do is foment a tremendous amount of resistance among young people to the imposition of this doctrine. So that's just not going to work.
I'm seeing that from the young people who then go talk to their parents who have opposite perspectives on those values, and that also creates additional schism, mm-hmm. with large numbers of Americans anyway taking their kids out of the public school system, mm-hmm. for that reason. Yeah,
and that's going to accelerate. That proclivity is going to accelerate.
What is the role of the school in society when we can't tell if parents are paying attention to these issues? Forget about, in their own lives, specifically with regard to their children.
Yeah, well, what I hope is that brilliant educators and self-motivated, let's say, get together and put together a curriculum for K through 12 and make it available online and just present an alternative to the entire school system and just win the argument on the basis of quality alone. It's like, think about it. We have this technology. We could make a curriculum, a full curriculum, with options, like broader than it needs to be by a substantial margin, and say, here.
But even in that setup, and I've been dabbling in that, and I agree it's very doable. It definitely will happen in universities. But where do values and value hierarchies play a role in that? Do you offer a smorgasbord of different value options? Here's some ideologies that are pretty linear. Here's religious, the word, which offers a much more robust ecology.
Yeah, well, you do that in part, I think, is you walk through the discussion, right, and say, well, here's some conclusions that have emerged from that historically. I mean, that'll depend on the wisdom of the people guiding that conversation. And it's very hard to be sophisticated enough to have a discussion of values in a manner that's actually going to be productive rather than counterproductive. And many conservative people are very, leery of schools' attempts to wander into the value domain at all, especially when it's driven by an ideology, parent ideology, rather than grounded in some tradition. So it's a very difficult problem to contend with. And I think you improve the school system by making better teachers, and you make better teachers by making better people. And so I'm sort of concentrating on the better people end of things and hoping that'll trickle down, so to speak. And
maybe our only choice.
Well,
I
don't know. I don't know what else to do about it. I'm very interested in this curriculum development idea, but I don't know if I have the energy for it. But it's a remarkable, I know this book, How to Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. It's a great book. Yeah. You can take a 4-year-old who's ready and teach them to read and write in 3 months. They've already laid it all out. It's brilliant. Cognitive behavioral principles. The parents can read it to their children. 10-minute lessons. Bang, 4 months. Literate. At least the beginnings. Yeah. So that's a great example of pedagogy that's firmly grounded. And that's not grounded in a value tradition precisely, but, at least people would learn to read.